Welcome to this Asia Global Dialogue 2020, the session towards a new multilateral global economy. The topic of this discussion is technology for the common good. My name is Alejandro Reyes. I will be moderating this session. I'm Director of Knowledge Dissemination at the Institute. Just a reminder to start that you may pose questions for panelists using the Q&A or comment functions, depending on the platform you're on. Because our topic this evening is rather broad and we have already had a busy day with 4 sessions on higher education, on the prospects for multilateralism, on global action on climate change, and on the post-pandemic recovery and the challenge of addressing inequality and sustainability, during which the issue of technology has come up, allow me just a minute or so for a quick summary. Previous speakers today have already brought up themes related to what we are discussing here. That the pandemic is, among other things, accelerating digitalization, the economies of businesses, of education, of human life. There is an absence of multilateral cooperation in determining the rules of the road in technology, particularly with the increasing application of artificial intelligence. That while decoupling may not be feasible or even possible, the US-China strategic competition, which in large part is focused on technology, is proving a strain on multilateral cooperation, especially for middle powers or smaller economies that more and more feel that they're having to choose between China and the US. That knowledge is the biggest driver of growth. That given the deployment of new technologies everywhere in the world, that there is perhaps a need to focus on the consumption side, consumption inclusiveness as a way to address income inequality and improve wealth distribution. There are other thematic strands that we should pursue if we aim for technology to serve the common good. I would highlight 3: the future of work, the devastation that AI and automation is already causing in employment. How do we deal with that in a time when the pandemic has resulted in significant layoffs? And then there is, of course, data. The data is the gold that the new tech tools are helping to mine, driving innovation and digitalization in all spheres, from healthcare to shopping. Corollary to this, but extremely important, are the issues of privacy, security, the concern that these emergent technologies are being used not just to improve efficiency, quality of life, convenience, but also for control, monitor, influence, maybe even manipulation. With every move you make, every button you push, how do governments limit themselves? On the one hand, using AI to maintain a safe environment for its citizens, yet not encroaching on individual rights and privacy. It's a tricky issue for every country. Every country may be tempted to use AI beyond the limits they would like. So this is really such a rich topic. I will dispense with lengthy introductions. Our panelists are all well known in their fields. Sam Palmisano is chairman of the Center for Global Enterprise. He was president of IBM from 2000, CEO from 2002, and chairman as well from 2003. Kai-Fu Lee is chairman and CEO of Sinovation Ventures. He was an executive first at Apple, then SGI, Microsoft, and then Google. Author of AI Superpowers, China and Silicon Valley, which was published in 2018 by Houghton Mifflin. Marjorie Yang is the chairman of Esquel Group, a Hong Kong-based textile and apparel manufacturer with operations throughout the world. She's been on the advisory boards of MIT Corporation, from where she has a bachelor's degree in mathematics. She's also an honorary member of the court of the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Sam, let me turn to you. I'd like to start with you because you would like to talk about definitions and history, which I think would be a good way to start our discussion. So please, Sam, your thoughts.
Yeah, Al, thank you. And thank you for that kind introduction. Also, and thank you to everyone joining our call this evening or this morning, my time. Yeah, I thought about this, our panel, the technology for common good. And as I was thinking about that, I was thinking about it in light of what do we mean by technology, common and good? So fundamentally, I started thinking about this through the lens of history, which I have an academic background in, but I also spent my career at IBM. So you live through a large institution and you develop a historical lens. So when you grow up inside an institution like that, you see what it takes to turn innovation and technology and worthy aspiration to something that lasts. into value that can survive through disruption, multiple economic cycles, and eras of history. Let's start with technology. Yeah, of course, it's a critical factor, but techno-determinism usually proves wrong. When you live through generations in which technology has made enormous leaps and bounds, you also get seduced into thinking that it drives history. But the reality is that technology is more driven by history than vice versa. Remember when bricks and mortar were going to be obsolete? Everything would move online, commerce, social relationships, government education, et cetera, et cetera. All bias and inequality would be eliminated. Digital markets by themselves would guarantee prosperity and sustainable futures. Well, that hasn't happened, and it won't. For instance, as critical as digital technology has proven in the pandemic, we're now realizing that you need physical schools, physical workplaces, physical social spaces, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not saying it won't have an impact as a result of the pandemic. I'm not saying digital technology's adoption rate won't go up. I'm just saying it won't change everything as many futurists tend to forecast. Today, AI is the next technology that will change everything. Well, it will change a lot and it'll help a lot. And yes, there'll be some disruptions along the way, but it won't solve our biggest challenges. I mean, like climate change, poverty, global health, global collaboration. Neither will blockchain, quantum computing, or genetic engineering. As promising as they all might be, and as an investor, as much money that we all make by investing in those kinds of technologies. Now, let me go to common. Globalization may have hit political speed bumps, but the reports of its death are premature. Quite simply, global integration is inevitable. Globalization didn't begin in 1980 or even in 1500. Humanity has been on a globalization journey since the dawn of our species. Ours is a saga of natural selection in which this one creature spread out and took over the entire planet. The only limits to that saga have been the limits of our technology, economic, and societal tools. Now, those tools have developed to a point where they are inherently global. The most critical challenges we face are also global. I discussed these: climate, economics, politics, et cetera, et cetera. We all share a fate, better or for worse. We're all in this together. So while geopolitics may ebb and flow in a given decade or two, or change with populism or political leadership for a short period of time, the underlying shifts continue. When you look at the data around rates of literacy, reduction in violence, data flows, financial flows, trade flows, et cetera, advancement of women, decline in poverty and starvation, there's very much progress has been made, even in the winter of a pandemic. So let me go to good. Intentions are not sufficient. We need structures, systems, institutions in business, in governance, and in civil society. If we turn our altruism into reality, it's only when market forces and technologies are marshaled to organize repeatable, sustainable human action, lasting value is created. Disruption will happen from technology or culture or politics or nature, but disruption isn't a goal. The goal is transformation. Markets are necessary, but they're not sufficient. We need institutions to manage disruptive events in order to ensure the outcomes are fair and sustainable. Lasting prosperity in civil society do not come from the Wild West. They happen when the sheriff gets into town, when streets are paved, when laws are put in place and schools are established. This was true with the technologies of the Industrial Revolution, and it's true with the technologies of networking and the data revolution that Al referenced. Let's talk a little bit about data, if you like. I can go back to cyber as well. I was the co-chair of the Obama Presidential Commission on Cybersecurity. But again, roads of the rule had to be established around cyber. International norms, protocols, procedures, what is a sovereign nation threat, what is a hack, et cetera, et cetera. Standards have evolved. It's still chaotic on the internet, but nonetheless, we've matured and we've grown. If you look back, take 10 or 15 years ago. Data. Al, you talked about all these issues associated with data. Use of the data, privacy protection of the data. Is there bias in the data? My think tank, the Center for Global Enterprises, created a consortium that I co-chair with Ken Chenault, the former chief executive of American Express. And we've been joined by CEOs of very large companies around the world: Walmart, CVS, Johns Hopkins, NFL, Nike, Under Armour, on and on and on, to work on this topic. But the issue, again, gets back to definition and principles. What are the definitions associated with responsible use of data? What is privacy exploitation? What is bias in AI? Definitions aren't established, just like in cyber, they weren't established initially. So until those definitions are created and established, then you can't have principles and guidelines or even regulations that's relevant. All you can do is debate it and have politicians argue about it. So that's what our consortium is up to, trying to come up with definitions that call those guardrails as you look to the future. So if I could summarize, the bottom line is don't overestimate the transformative impact of technology, but don't underestimate the lasting impact of transformation that comes through human institutions. That's the lesson of history. Technology is a common good. If adopted properly, we'll have great societal change, but it's something that needs governed. It needs to be governed, and institutions have to collaborate to make successful. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sam. Now, Kai-Fu, if I can turn to you, you've been very among the most candid when it comes to talking about the future of jobs in this fourth industrial revolution world. That the job displacement, we're not just talking about routine tasks, but jobs that could be affected could be white collar jobs, knowledge jobs, and that there are so AI is really, I think your estimate was that 50% of jobs might be threatened over the next 15 years. I'm wondering if you'd talk a bit about that and the impact of that, and how can it be mitigated or addressed, particularly given that we're now going through a pandemic where there have been a lot of lost jobs and that may not ever come back.
Sure. AI is really using a lot of data within a single domain on which is trained and optimized to do a routine task very well. So that includes things like answering phone calls as a customer service, taking over the job of a white collar back office person, or includes also blue collar work, starting from people who work in warehouses, visual inspection, simple kinds of assembly line, and also extends to jobs like drivers as autonomous vehicles become mainstream. So over the next 15 years or so, I think 40 to 50% of the tasks we do will be automatable. That means technically and economically feasible for AI to do. It doesn't mean that jobs will go away that fast. There are a lot of other issues, including what basically government regulations, labor laws, and user acceptance, and and CEOs and degree of enlightenment, and things like that. So we'll probably lag a little bit, but there's no doubt that these tasks are doable. My job is venture capital, and I would say probably half of the AI technologies we see being used or AI companies being started are targeting to save money by automating. And a lot of people don't want to acknowledge that because maybe it makes AI researchers or giant companies look bad. But we're seeing this in these companies. It's really happening. So I think we have to acknowledge and actually, in fact, get the message out there. And there are also people who would say that human AI are really symbiotic, which is in some sense true. If you take a job of, let's say, a receptionist, the part of that job that validates the person's identity and enters information into the system, that can be done by AI. But the part about greeting with the guests and having a kind of the face of the corporate, that's still the job of a human. So in some sense, it's symbiotic, but you can imagine in a company with 5 receptionists, you probably, once you have AI installed, you probably don't need all 5. You might only need 2. So the number of jobs in a particular work category will definitely go down as AI becomes more and more capable. And the other thing is AI gets better with data, so AI will continue to improve. And for people who maybe their job is taken away once, they want to pick up another unskilled routine job, the chances are it'll be taken by AI again. So this really paints a very challenging and even gloomy future about the rapid phase of displacement over time. And I think COVID makes it worse because people who are already either furloughed or lost their jobs will probably find a harder time coming back to work because companies are trying to save money and they won't as much feel an obligation to take back an employee they furloughed compared to in good times when they were very profitable, that it probably wouldn't be inclined to do layoffs just for the sake of saving money. So what can we do about that? Well, I think we need to really come up with methods of wealth reallocation. That is, if we look at the tremendous wealth that AI generates, it's largely going to the top 0.001% of the Silicon Valley elites and the equivalent in other countries. And at the same time, some measures need to be taken to re-equalize the situation and put some buffer in the case of the people who may have lost their jobs. Universal basic income may be the beginnings of a solution, but just shifting money isn't enough. We need to tell people and explain to people what jobs are going to be gone in what order. With EV and autonomous vehicle, we can pretty much be sure the auto mechanic jobs are going to be gone soon. The driver job will be longer. The plumber job will be longer because the physical house infrastructures aren't going to be stuck and machines aren't going to be able to deal with the debugging process of plumber. And then some jobs like nurse and even elderly care, people just don't want robots to do that. So it's pretty straightforward to figure out what jobs are going to stay, which ones are going to go. And I think very clearly service jobs are going to go up by a tremendous amount, especially those with people-to-people contact. So all of that can be turned into a playbook that governments can start to educate and get people ready for the transition. And finally, I think education needs to be shifted from the vocational schools that need to train more of people whose job categories are grown, fewer of those whose job categories are coming down, and all the way down to college, high school, and elementary school, and really teaching more of the skill sets that have to do with creativity, strategy, and analytical thinking, and also compassion, empathy, human skills, and really shifting towards that. Anything that's rote learning, we may need some of it as a foundational studies, but anything that's rote learning, we're never going to outdo AI. So I think a lot of this rethinking needs to go on. And the final point I'll make is that it will be a difficult 15 to 30 years to make that transition. But when all is said and done, 30 to 50 years from now, when our children and grandchildren look back, I think they will realize however difficult this period was, it will have accomplished something tremendous that humanity over thousands of years has never accomplished, which is that we would let AI liberate ourselves from having to do routine work so we can relearn and elevate ourselves to do the things that we are talented or passionate about. So I think eventually it'll be a good thing, but the transition will be hard.
Thank you, Kai-Fu. In fact, if I could just quote you from a documentary you participated in not too long ago, you said that AI is the ultimate tool of wealth creation. AI is a set of tools that helps you maximize an objective function, and that objective function will initially simply be to make more money. Now, that brings me to our business leader, Marjorie Yang. And Marjorie, you have a different perspective from Sam and Kai-Fu in that whilst you're there to make profits, to make money, you're looking at this topic from your perspective and your concern for people in your company who are at risk of being marginalized. And you're talking about corporate social responsibility and how technology in different ways could help close that wealth gap and raise the productivity at the bottom of the pyramid. I'm wondering if you would talk a bit about your perspective. Give us your perspective. Margie, could you unmute, please? Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, let me start from back at MIT. So I was very fortunate to have gone to the nerd school, and I continue to enjoy my nerd friends and nerd community. So I co-chair the Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Labs advisory. So while I'm completely ignorant of what they're really talking about, I also see the impact. Everything that I've read Kai-Fu's books, and I read others, and I have a fear. Now, I also joined a workforce, a task force at MIT. MIT doesn't talk about future of work. They deliberately call the task force work of future to make sure that we all know there will be work, but what is the nature of the work and how do we prepare people for it? Now, we all like to believe, all the nerds like to believe that technology will solve all social problems. Unfortunately, things are not turning out like that. And so we need to worry. For me, my responsibility is to provide quality employment for 40,000 people who do not have a technology, an education that prepares them for technology. In fact, many of them bears tremendous fear for technology. So what do we do? Now, our company have stated that our mission is, while making a profit, also is to fight climate change, close the wealth gap. Sounds fantastic, but how do you do it? Things are not looking good. With COVID, we have quantitative easing, therefore the situation is going to get worse. I am fortunate that we have a group of very dedicated young people who are fluent in technology. So they are willing to enter a company like ours in an industry that is known for low tech, no tech. But in fact, we can use a lot of technology. There is a lot of technology in education that have been developed over the years that allows us to learn and teach better. So, for example, there's a lot of knowledge developed at MIT. One of the technology is called App Inventor. It teaches children to code. We use the same method, and I would go up to one of our workers and ask her, does your son come and wave their phone at you and say, Mom, you are passé. This phone is a smartphone that you paid for, but your kid is waving it in your face to tell you that you are old and you don't know any technology. If you can turn around and tell him, hello, kid, Mom has written an app. Would you be interested? Even the most shy of workers would rise to the challenge. We have been able to teach workers, frontline workers, how to code using App Inventor. Once they can cross that barrier, they do not feel the fear of technology. And I think this is something that we are using technology to try to overcome or shorten the cycle time for training and education. Once we cross that barrier, then we can start to, while they're doing this, they're also learning computational thinking. And so this is the beginning. Now, once they have the confidence, then they can start the innovation journey to solve problems and join the technology era. So this is what we're trying to do. And I hope that we're quite happy with the results to date. And I hope that Sam and Kai-Fu and you will all help me to find new ways of making it happen at Esquel, because if it can happen here, it can happen everywhere.
Thanks. Marjorie, could you actually give us a specific example? Because I think I've heard of some of these employees that you have that have actually developed new ways of production processes through innovation, and it's technology to improve not just the profits or making money, but really the environment, to improve the workers' conditions.
One of our workers, one of the people in our engineering department is this lady, Ngan Zhe, who started off as a frontline sewer, and she's a high school graduate, but she knows the work. So she obviously has she's obviously also a very curious learner. And through the years, she's become one of our best engineers. And now she holds 3 patents. The other engineers, many of them are, well, most of them are university graduates. But Ngan Zhe, because of confidence, our job is to provide them a platform and the confidence for them to innovate, so they can overcome all these male engineers. She's not frightened by them. So she is able to rise and become she's an excellent engineer. She holds 3 patents. And we have other bottom-up innovations. Every year, we've been holding these bottom-up innovations, and we try to get all the floor as much as possible, just everyone to participate, and not just have the university graduates or the management to start in innovation. So internal innovation is a very important part of, I think, what all the other speakers are all addressing. I think we have a common goal of trying to bring everyone along on this journey of technology. So there are a lot of things that we could do. One person just wrote an app that it's a carpool app. And that, of course, saves a lot of fuel. And then they just got everybody to use it. So many things. The key is, how can we give these wonderful people the confidence that they can learn technology, but without having had a university education? And there are many, many ways that we've improved the ability to teach. There's been a lot of effort put in, and also in AI, one of the byproducts of AI is teaching better. So, and I think there's a lot more room to use AI to improve the way we teach, so that the disruption, Sam was talking about the Industrial Revolution, the disruption, the technology always brings about a period where there's tremendous disruption. And I'm wondering how we can shorten that period. And also, if we can teach older people better, then we can reduce this impact on them. So I'm just curious as to the what we can do. I have a lab. I welcome Sam and Kai-Fu to come and give us ideas and help us to bring all these people who do not have a technology background, but turn them into somebody who can share in the wealth, so that not all the money flows to Silicon Valley.
Thank you. Sam, if I could come back to you, maybe you would like to answer Margie's call, but one issue that you talked about in your initial comments were that we need structures, systems, institutions that lasting prosperity in civil society do not come from sort of a Wild West atmosphere or environment, but a town needs a sheriff. And but this is where, to take the theme of this conference towards a new multilateral global economy, one of the areas where we're really missing multilateral cooperation in an effective way is in technology, and certainly in AI governance. Where do you think the challenges are, and what do we need to do?
Alex, I mean, it's a great question. And I come at it through a lot of studies. The answer to a lot of studies we've done at the Center for Global Enterprise. And I'll give you just really quick examples. I don't want to take too much time, but Marjorie, to your point about in the individuals and nature of work and the kind of work that's being done, we agree with the assumption that work will be impacted. The nature of those tasks, as Kai-Fu has already mentioned, we're going to be impacted by technology. Eric Bernjolfsson, who was an economics faculty at MIT, we did it with MIT, who's now at Stanford. Now we followed him to Stanford, but nonetheless, went through all kinds of jobs. Yeah, I know exactly, but he left. I didn't send him there, but all kinds of jobs, and financial services and commerce and retail, et cetera, et cetera. The nature of the task, and we analyzed those tasks that would be impacted. And Kai-Fu said it well. I don't need to repeat it. They're the repetitive kinds of tasks, whatever they happen to be, that would be impacted. But we did this study to kind of lead management to say, okay, if you're going to go through this digitization journey, how do you get these people, to your point, from where they are today to where you need them to be? The solution is not fire them all. You know, now, I mean, in the downturn, there's going to be an economic adjustment driven by the pandemic, but that's not the solution long term. The solution long term is migrate your workforce to this higher skill set. So what you're doing, I think, would be very, very helpful, but it starts with the nature of the work that they do themselves. That led us to this trying to get our arms around in my little think tank. What's the impact of AI in this massive lookup of large data sets, statistical lookup, or mathematical lookup of large data sets? What is the answer to these societal concerns? The societal concerns are very real. They lack leadership, quite honestly, and from a geopolitical perspective, to address those concerns. And the way they approach it, let's go sue Facebook for antitrust, or let's go, antitrust is not the issue, quite honestly. Breaking up these companies will not stop technology's evolution going into the future, as Kai-Fu talks about. That's not the solution. The solution is, how do you responsibly use the data and use AI for the benefit of society, not just for the benefit of business. And I am an investor like Kai-Fu, and I'm getting great benefit from these technologies personally, but that's not the point. The point of this consortium is, how do you do that? Now, the point where I'll lead is the reason why the consortium, not my little think tank or Sam, concluded that the first step was really around definitions. There are no definitions that you can begin to have a logical discussion around how to make progress in the future, which is why I go back to the early stages of cyber. There were no definitions when we ran the Obama Commission. And you had to have definitions before you could have practices and before you could have regulation and law, right? So that's kind of where we are today, is what are the definitions around responsible use of the AI? People talk about bias in AI. Define bias for me in cultural norms, you know, and those sorts of things. They talk about AI is not explainable today. Well, it's just massive lookup today. That's why there's bias. It can't tell you why it came to those conclusions. Now, there are technologies out there that can do cognition and explain why it got to those solutions, but they're in the future. I mean, I'm working on a couple myself, but they're probably a year or two out, but they're not 20 years out. So, but my point of the discussion is, I think, Al, is that we need to get leadership to come together and understand the challenges associated with the technology, and then put together constructive mechanisms to advance their societies. Now, we know these are all global, which makes it almost impossible. But if we at least if we can get some large regional entities to do this, U.S. and China, just take, or maybe Germany, just take 2 or 3 large regional economic entities and societies, get them to come together. Maybe there's a chance that we can begin to make progress here. But we do need a sheriff, to the analogy I used and you mentioned. We need a sheriff. We need somebody to govern us. We need to pave the roads. All those things have to occur in this technological journey.
Thanks very much. So that's a very good segue to Kai-Fu, because if you're talking about US and China perhaps working together, that seems, at least at this point, after 4 years of Donald Trump, and I mean, maybe there's some hope, as we heard this morning, with the arrival of a more multilateralist, more, well, if I could use the word rational approach from a Biden administration. Kai-Fu, what are your thoughts on the opportunities for U.S.-China cooperation to make AI work for the common good?
Sure. I think there's still a lot of challenges of U.S.-China going back to the way it has been. I think a lot of it is concerned costs in the DC, and a lot of those concerns seem to be bipartisan. So I'm not sure a change in administration will completely solve those. But usually when, even if US continues to view China in a somewhat competitive, if not adversarial fashion, the way to really move more in a positive direction is to find areas where there are no conflicts, but it's a win-win situation. So when you look at some of the President-elect Biden's new plans, one is in climate, right? Possibly rejoining the Paris Accord. And we all know China has been very vocal and very committed to the climate initiative. So that would be an area the two countries could work together. And certainly if they were to apply AI, there'd be a lot of data, a lot of technologists who could choose to work together in this particular case, when some other areas that might be a little more contentious, such as things related to defense or 5G and so on. Another possible initiative is healthcare. I think it's unfortunate that the two countries didn't work together more, probably exacerbated by President Trump choosing to leave the WHO. But I think with, again, with President-elect Biden's decision or likely decision to go back to the WHO, I think that opens up a new opportunity. Because even when there's competition between two countries, when there is a powerful, larger enemy to both, such as COVID or such as generally to a pandemic, there are so many things to work on. It's not just about the vaccine and the treatments, but also understanding of what happened, how it happened, and measures and technologies and research into future avoidance. You know, we all know how, if addressed early, the pandemic would not be anywhere near the magnitude today. But how would people detect signals early? And there were actually some AI firms that claimed they detected some signals very early in Wuhan. And I think if countries work together on that, that also makes it a very big positive. US and China are very complementary in their strengths. US has clearly much stronger medical technologies, and both countries have AI. China has a large market and a lot of data. So together, whether it's on climate or healthcare or other similar, positive altruistic efforts like education, I think focus on these areas may lead to small wins that begin to move away from the current direction of competition and find a few successes that can be built upon.
Thanks very much, Kai-Fu. If I could just follow up a bit here, because I read an interview that Nicholas Thompson did with you recently, and you gave AI a grade of B- during the pandemic. I'm wondering if you could just tell us why you gave that assessment.
Looking at how powerful AI is and how much AI has done for the internet industry, for the financial industry, and so on, the amount of the contribution in a pandemic is really fairly modest. And the reason is AI needs to be built on data, and it needs to use historical data to predict future phenomenon and to make smart decisions. But the kind of pandemic that COVID-19 is a once in a century occurrence. So there has not been any significant data unless you go back to 1918. For the same reason, humans are unprepared. AI is also unprepared because there's no data. When you have no data, you can't make smart decisions or predict the future. So where I think AI is making a contribution is in the few areas like contact tracing, in slightly helping vaccines and drug discovery, and in the use of robotics to reduce contacts, and of course, all the uses of digital online that creates data that I think will accelerate the coming of AI. But all in all, if we look at the things we need the most, to slow down the spread, to figure out the cure, I would not say that as an AI person that I would say we've made a huge contributions. We've made some, but I think we'll do a lot better in the future.
Thank you. Now I'm going to go to questions from the listeners and viewers. I'm just going to warn our control room that because of our late start and my snafu at the beginning, that I'm going to go over time a little bit because we have a bit of time before Victor Fung, our chairman, gives his closing remarks. We have a question from Michael Yongharan. AI would create a wider income inequality. People are not created equal and we all have different strengths. Think of taxi drivers and waitering jobs. How many families rely on these jobs to create a brighter future for their children and climb the social ladder? To what extent do you agree with that? Marjorie, I think that this hews to some of the things that you're talking about needing to help the bottom of the pyramid.
Well, definitely. I don't think that's necessarily true, because I think we can make AI help people who are less fortunate to become more innovative. And this is exactly what we're trying to do at Esquel. Also, I think to referring to the Sino-US relations, I think there is a lot of blame put on AI about causing unemployment. And we have to demonstrate that AI can be used to create more innovative people and not just the job destructive side of AI. And so I'm quite confident that we can show that we can use AI and other knowledge to enhance and reduce the pain caused by this rapid evolutionary change in technology. So I don't think it's a definite case of what the question was stated.
Now, Marjorie, I know that at some point you have to leave, so don't worry about it. If you have to leave, but we'll probably go beyond our original
Thank you for your understanding.
Time. So please don't worry about it. Kai-Fu, I'm wondering if I could go back to you on this, because you did have the quote that I mentioned about right now, at least for the foreseeable future, for initially, I think those are the exact words, that it's really the profit motive that's driving AI. So that does, and you're very clear that the haves and have-nots there may be a wider gap between them. So is this going to be a problem, a major problem going forward?
Well, I certainly believe so. We've talked quite a bit about the job displacement, so let me focus on the profits instead, because fundamentally what AI is using a lot of data to make decisions, and if to the extent those decisions are correlated with your business and profit, well, what CEO is going to not use them, right? I mean, if you're Mark Zuckerberg, can you really say, don't use AI to maximize user minutes because it might mislead some people? I mean, if you were, Jeff Bezos, would you really say, don't use AI to push products that I think people will buy? Don't use the objective function to maximize my revenue or profit. I mean, every CEO is probably a dream come true that you have an objective function that can take lots of data from users coming by, and you can say, show me stuff that will give me the most revenue. Show me stuff that will give me the most profit. It's almost the magical gift for the CEOs to make more money for the shareholders. So as long as the CEOs and the companies are incented to please the shareholder and view the business metric as something they can automatically improve based on large amounts of data, it's a temptation that's very, very hard to resist. So, and that's going to make the powerful companies even more powerful. I think the left unchecked, companies like Facebook, Google, Amazon, and China's Alibaba and Tencent will continue to grow. I agree with Sam that the solution is not to break them up, but I think we have to recognize there is a trend for, given in the past, how did monopolies come about? It's smart business people who run companies and build up a brand, build great products, attract customers, and then beat competition. Now we add on top of that, you collect data and use the data to train better AI. So that fortifies companies who are strong. So I do think we have to be aware of that. And actually, it's also not just AI. If we think about the inequality that has been basically increasing ever since computer and internet, I'm very proud to be a part of this industry, but I have to acknowledge that this technology has, actually quoting Eric Grenofson, right, been the something that has significantly brought up the productivity of people without the economic payoff to the people who did the work. So, a lot of the issues in the world are the divisiveness, and the divisiveness is helping the rich get richer, and then now it's creating challenges for people who have routine jobs. So I do think this is an issue that needs various ways to address it. Philanthropy, social responsibility, governments coming up with ways, appropriate tax increases to try to reach more of a balance.
Thank you. Sam, I don't know if you want to respond, but there is a question here as well so do we think that we need a new parameter for corporate social responsibility around the globe now?
Yeah, I mean, Kai-Fu and I agree just about everything he said. The challenge we face is how do you rebalance the economic opportunities for all? That is the challenge, right? We know we got here, and Kai-Fu mentioned this, not just on technology, but also quantitative easing. When money is free, it's helped the top, say, 1% or 10. Guys like ourselves who have a lot of assets, who can afford to invest in VCs, we've all benefited. Not that we needed to, I mean, we just happened to be there and benefited, right? We left a lot of people out, and that needs to be addressed. I completely agree. The solution to that is not to say, don't innovate, don't create future technology. The solution to that is get everybody participating in this change. So how do you grow participation in the change? Multiple ways you do that. Clearly, it starts with what Marjorie was saying. You have to give them the skills. They can't have no skill in this environment. Now the technology is getting easier to use. I'm invested in a couple of startups that make it almost a layperson can structure a query. You don't have to be a data scientist, et cetera, et cetera. But still, it requires some basic understanding of technology, some basic analytical kinds of capabilities, right? So my point is, you have to upskill the population for this future generational shift. This is where I believe companies have a responsibility. I mean, it's more than just take your money and give it to somebody. That's what the governments would like you to do. Take up our taxes in the private sector and redistribute it, because I'm a better distributor of wealth than you are as a company. I think a more and that has not worked. I mean, if you look at the social systems around the world, they really haven't worked. Globalized healthcare, I mean, public healthcare has not really worked, and those kinds of things. And you really study them in detail, how these things really work. I mean, so my point of it is, the way you really do this, I believe, if I was still working as a CEO, I would spend my money in two ways. One is growing my own workforce with the skills that they need, so they're not displaced, that they're enhanced. Eric calls this augmented AI, as my friend Kai-Fu knows. We're all quoting Eric today, but he would call that augmented AI. Michael Spence as well would call it augmented AI. So enhance the skill force. At the same time, create your philanthropic initiatives as a company like IBM did, where we built 200 schools around the world that did exactly what Marjorie's talking about. We have 200 now that IBM actually built. I did the first, say, 10 before I retired. but fundamentally to address the fact that these people still don't have those skills. And then you also need like economic zones where VCs are incented to invest with those kinds of companies, et cetera, et cetera. But that will happen naturally. I mean, my view, money will flow to where there's opportunity. It always does. So I completely agree, but it's a broader issue than just technology. It goes back to you need a sheriff to come to town. You need some guiding force here that it's encouraging companies to balance out their investment scenarios.
Thank you. We have a question from 2018 Asia Global Fellow who talks, Ira Paulo Poison, and he asks, so it's true AI gets better as it learns. That said, can anyone provide insight as to what work or jobs may be automated in the fifth industrial revolution? In the sense that we must prepare the workforce, are there jobs already at risk in the next stages of technology that are becoming more evident today? Kai-Fu or Sam?
I mean, Kai-Fu and
Yeah.
I think are going to say the same thing. We did the MIT study of 3 industries, but
Yes.
it's basically, if you look at the jobs that are going to be impacted, the ones that are very repetitive. Call centers are very repetitive. Think about it as back office administrative functions are very, very repetitive. Credit authorizations, very repetitive. So anything with the majority of tasks that you do every day is repetitive, that will lend itself to automation and augmentation. Things that are more cognitive, I mean, Kai-Fu said all this, I'm just repeating it, that are more, you need to have more a broader perspective. You have to have some reasoning associated with it. They're lower, they're maybe later stage. AI is not there today. Maybe it will get there at some point in time, but it's really not there today. So in the studies that Eric and his team did, and Dan, who's now, everybody left Kai-Fu from MIT. Dan's Rose is now at Wharton, and Eric's now at Stanford,
Yeah.
but they were the core team that did this work, right? And it's excellent work. It's excellent work, quite honestly. But that's the nature of those tasks. So I mean, to the person asking the question, so as you look at your own workforce, if you have a company and you look at those repetitive tasks, you could argue that's the opportunity for productivity, but it's also the challenge to migrate those individuals, which is I think Tank is working on. How do you migrate those individuals to future opportunities in this digitized world?
We have another question from Lynn Dilag. Will the big corporation now accept applicants who learn things through self-study due to the availability of many learning tools that similarly lead to a mastery of a profession, coupled with their personal experience in the workplace? So will there be different criteria, you think, for getting a job? I mean, what sort of different criteria would be looking for different kinds of skills? Kai-Fu, do you have any thoughts on this particular area?
Sure, it's very hard to predict exactly what jobs will be available. I agree with Marjorie when she said earlier that AI will create a lot of jobs. Or was it Sam? I think we all believe that. The problem is we don't really know what jobs they are. And when people say, well, Kai-Fu, you call yourself an AI expert, you can't tell me what jobs will get created. But if you go back 20 years, like when internet was just beginning, and you ask any expert, what jobs will the internet create? Well, people at that time, they could tell you a few, website designer and so on. But how many people at that time, 20 years ago, would have predicted Uber driver as a big category of jobs that would not have been possible without the internet? So internet experts cannot predict what jobs internet will create. So today, AI experts similarly cannot predict in 15, 20 years what jobs will be created. What we can tell you is that there are a set of skill sets that would be very hard for AI to learn to replace people. And they are, as I mentioned before, creativity, analytical thinking, and counterfactual thinking, and ability to reason, common sense, that's hard. And similarly, dexterity and ability to navigate in unknown environments, that's hard. And similarly, trust in each other, empathy, compassion, teamwork, communication. So you add these up, these are kind of the skills that AI is not likely to match with human. So jobs that require these elements are the ones that I think will be most safest, and most sustainable.
We have a question from Lin Shuhong about ethics. And I recall that just a few days ago, the ethics team leader at Google was fired, and that made a lot of news, in part because people may have been surprised that Google had an ethics team leader. I'm wondering if you talk about that in terms of with the tech companies, is there, how would you incorporate sort of ethics in applying AI into applications? Sam?
Yeah, I'll start. I mean, basically, I think the key to that is make the AI explainable. I mean, for example, when you search on Google and you get an answer, explain why you got that answer. Because if you could explain how you got to that answer, I mean, call it cognition, if you could explain it through natural language processing, therefore the user understands whether there was bias or not. I will argue that if you use only statistical methods, as Kai-Fu knows very well, much better than I do being a technologist, those methods today, because of the data, are inherently biased. The data itself is biased, and you're just searching for patterns in the data. I mean, everybody wants to blame on the human beings that are doing the algorithms, but it's the data itself. I mean, so change the algorithms, you still have the bias within the data itself, right? So my point is that the way you can get around that issue of bias within the data is make it explainable. And there are companies that are great people are working on that kind of capability. It's there. I mean, it's getting mature, but I mean, where you can explain the answer. So if they tell you that, oh, I think you have this type of cancer, well, why? You know, tell me why you think I have that kind of cancer, and answer the question, whatever it happens to be, versus just pop up something. These are 3 great cancer doctors, go see one of those. No, tell me why you think I have this symptom that leads to cancer, those kinds of things. So it's the natural language processing that answers the why question. I believe that is the answer to this. I don't think, the reason why I don't think the current methodologies that people use today is why they need large data sets is because it's statistical, it's basically statistical lookup, with very advanced, very fast computing. Forget all that. That's basically, simply stated, that's what it is. The data itself has biases in it. So it doesn't matter how much data you have, you're still going to have inherent biases in the data. So you have to have something that's explainable.
Thank you. I'm going to close in just 2 minutes. So I'm going to ask Kai-Fu the last question, in large part because there were a number of questions for you. One viewer was saying that she loves the painting hanging in your room. And she's just wondering how long you would think it would take AI before it would be learned to do a creative job like painting that painting. And she would also like to know who the artist is. And I guess another question that's related is how long before stock markets are fully run, monitored, and analyzed almost wholly by AI? Kai-Fu, and then Sam, if you just wanted to chime in on the stock market issue, that's fine. And then we'll try to close in about 2 minutes.
Okay, well, I'm sorry to inform you that I'm currently in a service apartment. So this is not any real work of art, but something replicated.
Maybe by an AI. Maybe
nice,
an AI did it. Yes.
Well, I'll tell you, AI can definitely do art that will please the great majority of people. What AI cannot do is to come up with a new style like Picasso did or Monet did. AI can definitely copy Monet, can copy Picasso, and not copy a painting per se, but use the style over any kind of a picture. So AI has already been creating very good art. I think, people who really understand art want it to be innovative, new style, and analyzable, and trace back to the psyche and all that. AI cannot do that. But just to make a nice picture that people can appreciate, I think AI can do it today. So I think, even though I said earlier, AI can't do creative things, AI can replicate, music, and paintings and even writing now, if you look at technology called GPT-3. So AI is definitely improving in all kinds of aspects. Yeah, stock market, yes, well, today, most of the trades in the market are traded by a machine, not necessarily by an AI algorithm, but But I think a lot of those algorithms will be upgraded by AI over time, right? Today, many of the very high frequency trading are trying to take advantages of inefficiencies among different exchanges. But AI can do a much deeper analysis of that. In fact, one of the companies we funded is doing exactly that. So I do think more and more AI will be used in secondary market trading. AI works better in investment in areas where there's large quantities of correct data present. So the stock market is a relatively good one. So I do expect more and more of the trading and investment will be done by machine. However, the job that I do, early stage VC investment, it's more about seeing the people, understanding the trend. So my job is safe for now.
Well, that's good news.
Yeah.
So I think we're over time. I just wanted to thank our panelists, Sam Palmisano, Kai-Fu Lee, and Margie Yang. I guess I would say that we're really in a very difficult point at this time, or a kind of perplexing period where the changes are quite significant. We're sure about the job losses. We're sure about the disruptions that technology and AI are going to have. And indeed, there may be periods and places and sectors where the wealth gaps will just widen, and it may be very difficult to deal with. Now, that's in many ways the job of governments, but also, as Margie has made clear, that it's employers too have a certain responsibility and need to examine exactly what they can do to enhance the skill sets of their employers, so that employees, so that they can in fact make use of technology to better their own particular situations, their own ability to weather this very difficult period. And I guess on the macro picture, the picture, we would need some rules for the road, but this may be a difficult challenge, particularly given that there's this friction that currently exists between the US and China, the biggest players at the moment. But there are opportunities, particularly with the new administration coming in. So that's a kind of rough summary of our discussion. I apologize to our viewers and listeners for the snafus at the beginning. I hope thanks very much again to our panelists for the fantastic discussion. I'd just like to remind our audience that we have the closing session of the Asia Global Dialogue 2020. This is closing remarks by our chairman, Victor Fung. And please, you need to log in with the unique Zoom link to listen to Victor's closing remarks. Well, he will talk about new directions for multilateralism for the post-pandemic digital economy. So thank you very much and good evening.